Hello everybody, and welcome to part 2 of our unit. Now we're going to talk about how categorical syllogisms are understood in terms of their validity. Okay? We know we have 4 types of propositions: an A, an E, an I, and an O. Anytime you're given a categorical proposition, the first thing you want to look at is to determine how many terms you have. Most categorical syllogisms are pretty straightforward, and they look like this. All dogs, we tried this one, are mammals. Fluffy is a dog. Therefore, Fluffy is a mammal. Okay? Now, in this statement, the first thing you want to figure out is, check out your terms here, okay? So, again, the major term is always the predicate term in the conclusion. So I know mammals is my major term. The minor term is always the subject of the conclusion. So I know Fluffy is the minor term. The middle term, of course, is the term that appears in both premises, but not the conclusion. Now, in this case, all dogs are mammals. That's true. Fluffy is a dog. Let's assume that's true. And therefore, if those were both true, Fluffy would have to be a mammal, right, with 100% certainty. Boom, valid argument. Why? Again, I have 3 terms here. Mammals, some air-breathing thing. Dog, woof, 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 means the same in both terms, and Fluffy is the name of the dog. So I have 3 terms. You're only allowed 3 in a categorical syllogism, just 3. Sometimes it looks like there's 3, but there might be more. I'll give you an example. Let's take a look at this one. Sidney Crosby is a penguin. That's true. All penguins live at the South Pole. That's true too. Therefore, Sidney Crosby lives at the South Pole. Don't think so. Now, but if these 2 were true, if Sidney Crosby was a penguin, and if all penguins lived at the South Pole, would it force the conclusion that Sidney Crosby lives at the South Pole? In this case, no. Because how many terms am I talking about here? First off, this term, Sidney Crosby, okay, which is my minor term. Sidney Crosby is a guy who, is a hockey player, right? Things that live at the South Pole, which is my major term, is anything that lives at the South Pole. That means the same thing. But what about the word penguin? Does the word penguin mean the same thing in both premises? And the answer is no. In premise 1, I'm talking about a hockey player, a guy that plays on the team, the Pittsburgh Penguins. In premise 2, I'm talking about the little waddly penguin bird. Okay? So, in this case, I don't have 3 terms. I got 4. Things that live at the South Pole, major term. Sidney Crosby, the guy, minor term. Penguins, the bird, and penguins, the hockey team. 4 terms. The syllogism is only allowed to have 3. So in this case, this syllogism is invalid. If these 2 things are true, it doesn't force this because I can only use 3 terms in the categorical syllogism. Here, you actually have 4. Now, this type of error in syllogisms doesn't occur too often, but it is the very first thing you have to check. Do the terms mean the same thing in each time they're used? Okay? The second thing you will have to take a look at is something called distribution. If something passes the first test, and the next thing you want to look at is the middle term has to be distributed in at least one premise. Now, what does that mean, distributed? The easiest way to think about that is to look at it this way. If we have the 4 premises, okay, all S is P, no S is P, some S is P, some S is not P. And that's an A, an E, an I, and an O, right? So you got an A, an E, an I, and an O. Distribution means which term in essence is excluded here. So if you take a look at an A statement, okay, you have S and P, right? So if you say all S is P, if you draw in the Venn diagram, it looks like this, right? You're saying if all whales are mammals, okay? So I'm looking at that one. If whales can only exist there, right? Because if you're a whale, you also have to be a mammal. You can't be here, can you? These are whales that would not be mammals. There's nothing there. So in this case, it is the subject only that is distributed. Now, to make it easy, here's a good chart to remember. Okay? An A statement distributes the subject. An E statement distributes both. Subject and predicate are both distributed, because the only thing that exists is in the middle there. Okay? Between the two. Now, in an E statement, in an I statement, nothing is distributed. And in an O statement, only the predicate, only P. So here's a good little chart to write down. A distributes the subject only. E distributes both. I distributes nothing. And O distributes the predicate only. Okay? So if you know that, and that's going to be a critical thing to remember, because that'll really help you with this, let's take a look at a syllogism using that. Okay? The first thing we're always going to check is whether or not we have three terms. So I'm going to use one here. All Russians were revolutionists. Okay? All anarchists were revolutionists. Therefore, all anarchists were Russians. Okay? First thing we always do when we get a syllogism is we break it down into our major, middle, and minor terms. Okay? So let's do that first. And we know we always have a subject and a predicate in the conclusion. We know the major term is always the predicate term in the conclusion. So it's Russians. If it's the major term there, it's the major term there. Minor term is anarchists. Boom, there it is. That means my middle term in this particular syllogism is revolutionists. Okay? So the first thing I do is check to see how many terms I have. Russians, people who live in Russia, means the same thing there. Anarchists, people who don't believe in government, same thing there. Revolutionists, people who want to have a revolution, means the same thing in both. Okay? So I got three terms. Hooray! I'm almost valid. The next thing I got to check is the middle term distributed in at least one premise? If it's not, you can invalidate the argument. Okay? So, what type of statements do I have here? In this case, all Russians were revolutionists. All S is P. That is an A statement. Okay? The second one, all anarchists were revolutionaries. All S is P. Ooh, another A. Now, in an A statement, if you look back at that chart, which hopefully you just wrote down, in an A statement, what got distributed? Okay? If you wrote that down, you will know that in an A statement, only the subject is distributed. Okay? So in the first premise, what got distributed? The word Russians. Because Russians is the subject of that premise. In the second premise, all anarchists were revolutionists. What got distributed there? Again, it's an A statement, so the subject of that particular premise gets distributed. In this case, anarchists. So, in either premise, did the middle term get distributed? The answer is no. The middle term was revolutionists. Okay? It got distributed in neither the first nor the second premise. That's step 2. That means the syllogism is invalid. It didn't pass rule number 2. We did have 3 terms, so it got through rule number 1, didn't get through rule number 2. This argument is invalid. Okay? So that's rule 2. Rule 3. Let's take a look at another syllogism. I hope you find this helpful. Any term distributed in the conclusion must be distributed in the premise. What on earth does that mean? Let's do one. All dogs are mammals. You've seen this one before, right? Okay. No cats are dogs. Pretty comfy with both of those. And then finally, therefore, no cats are mammals. Now again, whether or not the conclusion is true or false, we don't care. We're trying to find out if the argument itself is valid. Do the premises, if they're true, force the conclusion to be true? So, let's find out. Rule number 1. How many terms do we have? We got 3. Dogs, woof woof. Cats, meow meow. Mammals, air-breathing little things. Okay, so we got 3 terms. Super. Next thing, we're going to determine if the middle term got distributed. Okay, let's check it out. P, S. So I now know my major term is mammals. My minor term is cats. My middle term is dogs. I need to figure out if the middle term got distributed. I look in the first premise. All S is P. That is an A statement. In an A statement, what got distributed? In an A statement, you always distribute the subject. What's the subject of this bad boy here? It's dogs. Okay? All S is P. S got distributed. Dogs got distributed. Dogs is a middle term. Middle term distributed. Woohoo! Passed rule number 2. Yay. Now, rule number 3 says any term distributed in the conclusion must also be distributed in the premise. Let's find out. In this case, we have to take a look at what other term got distributed. In this statement here, or I'm sorry, any statement distributed in the conclusion. Okay? So in this is an E statement, right? So in an E statement, what gets distributed? Both, right? And we know that. So in an E statement, cats and mammals got distributed. If it's distributed in the conclusion, and in this case both are, they both have to be distributed in the premises as well for the argument to be valid. So let's see if that's true. We already know, all right, let's take a look. All dogs are mammals, so we don't really care about, or mammals was not distributed here, right? Because this is an A statement, only the subject got distributed. Cats got distributed here. This is an E statement too, so both the premise and conclusion get distributed here. So, cats, distributed in the conclusion, right? And distributed in the premise. Super. Mammals is distributed in the conclusion, not distributed in the premise. What you have here is what is called an illicit major. Okay? The major term was distributed in the conclusion, but was not distributed in the premise. Okay? So if it violates that rule, it's out. Now, another one along the same lines as that, you can have an illicit major. You can also have what's called an illicit minor. Let's take a look at an example of that. This is a long one, sorry about this. All traditionally religious people are fundamentalists. Okay? That's premise 1. Premise 2. All traditionally religious people oppose abortion. That's premise 2. The conclusion, all opponents of abortion are fundamentalists. Okay, we have 3 terms here. People who oppose abortion means the same thing. Fundamentalists, same thing. Traditionally religious people, same thing. Okay, 3 terms. The next thing we check is the middle term distributed at least once. And you go through every step, every time, until you find one reason to invalidate it. You get all the way to the bottom, and you haven't violated any rules, you, my friends, have a valid argument. So, first thing we always do, friends, is we break it down into what we know here. Fundamentalists is your major term, because that is the predicate term in the conclusion. Opponents of abortion is your minor term. So, we know fundamentalists is your major term. We know opponents of abortion is your minor term. And then we now know that traditionally religious people is our middle term. Okay? Let's check and see if the middle term got distributed at least once. Here's an all S is P. All traditionally religious people are fundamentalists. That's an A statement, right? And if you look at that cool little chart I just designed for you, in an A statement, what gets distributed? That's right, that would be the subject, which would be traditionally religious people. Ooh, bingo, middle term distributed, hooray for us. Okay, so we're pretty happy with that. Middle term has been distributed. Now, we got to take a look and remember, is any term distributed in the conclusion also distributed in the premise? Okay, so we leap right to our conclusion. It's an A statement. Okay, and in an A statement, what gets distributed in an A? It's the subject. So the phrase, opponents of abortion, which is the minor term, right? The minor term was distributed in the conclusion. So now we got to check and see if it's distributed in the premise. Okay? So let's find the minor term. It's here in the minor premise, right? All traditionally religious people are opponents of abortion. This is an A statement. In an A statement, what got distributed? In an A statement, the subject does. What is the subject of this particular premise? Subject's always the beginning part, right? So what got distributed was traditionally religious people. Opponents of abortion was not distributed in this premise. It was distributed in the conclusion, not in the premise. The minor term, distributed in the conclusion, not distributed in the premise. That, friends, is an illicit minor. So you can have either an illicit major or an illicit minor. If the term is distributed in the conclusion, it must be distributed in the premise or it invalidates the argument. Okay? Now, rule number 4 is pretty straightforward and easy. No valid argument, can have 2 negative premises. Okay? That's a nice easy one. No cats are vegetarians. No vegetarians are from Canada. Therefore, no cats are from Canada. Okay, man, that's silly. But anyway, if you see 2 negative premises, boom, you're done. No valid argument can be made from 2 negative premises. Okay? That's pretty straightforward. That's an easy one. Now, however, you can have at least 1 negative premise, and you may sometimes. So let's take a look at one like that. Let's say you have an argument like this. No poets are accountants. And again, some of these premises may seem a bit silly. The point is, it doesn't matter. No S is P. I don't care what words. Plug in words you do like. the point is with this type of system, it really doesn't matter what the words are. It's the form that matters. Okay? So I have no S is P. I have some artists are poets. Therefore, some artists are accountants. Again, first thing we do is we look for terms. We have 3 terms: accountants, guys who do debits and credits; artists, people that do art; poets, people who make poetry, right? We check to see if the middle term is distributed at least once. And in order to do that, we just kind of break it down. We know this is our major term, accountants. We know this is our minor term, artist, right? S, P. We now know that poets is the middle term, right? And to make sure the middle term is distributed at least once, we have one of these great E statements. I love E statements because everything gets distributed. Hooray! It's an E statement. So both the subject and the predicate got distributed. So did this middle term poets get distributed? Absolutely. Hooray for that. Okay. Now, next thing is what got distributed in the conclusion. Now in this case, you have some S is P. Okay? It's an I statement. What got distributed in I? Nothing. Super. So I don't have to worry about it, right? If nothing got distributed in the conclusion, excuse me, then I don't care what got distributed in the premise. Boom. I can leap right through that. That's awesome. Okay. So the next thing I have to look at is, do I have 2 negative premises? No. I have 1. I have no S is P. That's a negative. But this one's not. This is an affirmative premise. So it passed that rule. The next rule says this. If either premise is negative, the conclusion must be negative. You cannot have an affirmative conclusion with a negative premise. It simply will not work. Okay? So in this case, I do have a negative premise, at least one. The conclusion's affirmative. Doesn't work. Okay? I've now invalidated that argument. If either premise is negative, excuse me, the conclusion must be negative. Okay? We're almost done. The next rule says, from 2 universal premises, no particular conclusion may be drawn. I'll give you an example of that. Okay. The next part here says, all household pets are domesticated animals. Okay? All household pets are domesticated animals. No unicorns are domesticated animals. Therefore, some unicorns are not household pets. Okay? How does this one work? Again, we got to go through all our rules. We got 3 terms here. You know, unicorns, things with little pointy heads or pointy horns. Household pets, domesticated animals. It means the same thing. Okay? Household pets, major term. Unicorns, minor term. Middle term, therefore, must be domesticated animals. Is the middle term distributed at least once? Well, we got one of these handy-dandy E statements here. No S is P. We know everything gets distributed in there, so we know the middle term got distributed. Sweet. Next, we got to figure out if anything in the conclusion that was distributed also got distributed in the premise. Now, this says some S is not P. Some S is not P is an O statement. That means in an O statement, only the predicate got distributed. So in the conclusion, household pets got distributed. Did it get distributed in the premise? Yeah, it did up here, because this is an A statement. All S is P. So it passed that premise. Okay? Do I have two negative premises? No. If one premise is negative, the conclusion must be negative. Is that true? Yeah. I got one negative premise here, right? And the conclusion, some unicorns are not household pets. It's a negative conclusion. Okay? So I'm good there. But in this case, I'm going to violate the last rule. All no. These are universals. You cannot draw particular conclusions from universal premises. Okay? If both premises are universal, in this case they are. All is universal, no is universal. You can never have the word some as a conclusion, in the conclusion, if you have both premises being universal. Okay? That is the way you walk through any syllogism. If any syllogism makes it through every one of these steps, it is a valid argument. Okay? Hopefully that will give you a good insight as to what you need to do on the quiz this week. If you found this helpful, let me know, because next week we have a whole bunch of other logic stuff that can be pretty challenging. And if you like these videos, I'll be happy to make you another one. Good luck. If you run into any issues or problems, give me a call, and I'll see if I can help you. Best of luck this week, and thanks again.